Hey everybody, today we have a fun assignment to do working on modifying a recipe to make it just the right size. This is an example of some real-life math that you might find yourself doing in the kitchen. Let's take a look at the performance task as a whole and think about what we're going to be asked to do. First, I can see that there's a recipe here for making peanut butter cookies. I notice that this recipe makes 2 dozen cookies. So there's 12 in a dozen, so 2 dozen would be 24 cookies. Okay, and then on the other side of the recipe card here, it says that the serving size is 1.5 cookies, meaning like they're saying that a healthy serving size for one person to have at a time would be 1.5 cookies. Okay, the first section asks us to figure this out. Caroline wants to make these cookies to bring to a party, and she'll need to double the recipe to have enough. How much of each ingredient will she need? Rewrite the recipe so that it will make 4 dozen cookies. The first thing I want you to do is draw a picture to represent what's happening in the problem. This is something I'm going to be looking for when I grade your work, so make sure that you pause the video and take time to make a quick sketch. Okay, so now compare your picture to my picture, and let's see if we're missing anything. Here we have Caroline, and she has made a big platter with 2 dozen cookies on it. And I know that because the original recipe makes 24 cookies, or 2 dozen. But then they tell me that she actually wants to double this recipe so that she can end up with 4 dozen cookies. In order to double the recipe, I'm going to have to take each of these ingredients and double it, or multiply the amount called for by 2. So I'm going to make a nice, neat, organized list of all the ingredients, multiply them all by 2, and check them off as I go along so I don't skip anything. Okay, let's start with the peanut butter. Okay, I can see that the original recipe calls for 3/4 of a cup, or 3/4 of a cup. When I multiply that times 2, I need to put whole number 2 on top of a denominator of 1, and that will make it easier to multiply. Then I can just multiply straight across my numerators. 3 times 2 is 6, and straight across my denominators. 4 times 1 is 4. Now when I look at 6/4, I can see that this is an improper fraction, so I need to change it to a mixed number. 6/4 is the same as 1 2/4, which is the same as 1.5. So just for that one recipe, I've got a bunch of steps here. Okay, so her new recipe, let's see, peanut butter. Her new recipe is going to call for 1.5 cups. Okay, now let's look at vegetable shortening. So shortening, I don't know if you guys know this, but shortening is like oil. So, but it's kind of solid. Instead of liquidy, for some reason, the way that the shortening is made, they make it so that it's like solid and you can scoop it out like butter. Okay, so she's gonna need 1/2 of a cup of shortening, and then we're gonna multiply that times 2 to double it. So 1 times 2 is 2, and 2 times 1 is 2, so that, of course, duh, I could have done that in my head. That's 1 cup of shortening. Okay, I'm gonna let you continue on your own. You need to double all of these ingredients. So go nice and slow and make sure that you cross off the ingredients or check them off as you go so that you stay organized. Make sure you're recording your work because that is something I'm going to be looking for when I grade your assignment. Okay, now let's look at the second part of the assignment. This tells us that everyone loved Caroline's cookies so much that they ate them all. and she wants to make some more to eat at home, but she only wants 1 dozen cookies this time. How much of each ingredient will she need? Rewrite the recipe so that it will only make 1 dozen cookies. Okay, this is a little bit of a different challenge. This time we're learning that Caroline wants to reduce her recipe or make it smaller. How are we going to change this recipe to one that only makes 1 dozen cookies? Her original recipe is going to make 2 dozen cookies. So I'm thinking that if we take each of these ingredients and cut them in half or divide them by 2, we'll end up with a recipe that makes half the amount of cookies. So we need to take each of these amounts and divide it by 2. When you divide a fraction by a whole number, your system for solving that problem is going to be a little bit different. Okay, let's think about this using an area model. I'm going to say that this rectangle represents my 3/4 of a cup of peanut butter. So I'm going to cut it into 4 equal pieces, and then I'm going to shade 3 of them, and that represents the peanut butter I need for the recipe. Now, if I cut this 3/4 of a cup, each piece into 2 equal pieces, how much of the whole cup is in each piece? 3 out of 8 equal pieces. So 3/4 divided by 2 equals 3/8. Here's another way to solve that. You can multiply by the reciprocal. That means that we're going to take 3/4, that stays the same. Our division is going to change to multiplication, and then we need to find the reciprocal of 2. When we find the reciprocal of a number, the top becomes the bottom, and the bottom becomes the top. So the reciprocal of 2 is 1/2. This makes sense because we can see in our area model that we're essentially taking half of 3/4. And we've already talked about how that magic word of is kind of a signal to you that you need to multiply. Now that we have a multiplication problem, we can multiply straight across the numerators and straight across the denominators. And we still get 3/8 of a cup of peanut butter. Okay, let's do the same thing with our 1/2 cup of vegetable shortening. We need to cut that amount in half in order to reduce the recipe. So I'm going to take 1/2 of the 1/2 cup of vegetable shortening. Now I can multiply straight across my numerators and straight across my denominators, and that gives me 1/4 of a cup of vegetable shortening. I can do the same operation using division. If I take the 1/2 cup of vegetable shortening and divide it into 2 equal pieces, then I'm going to go ahead and multiply by the reciprocal and still get 1/4 of a cup. So that's just 2 different ways to get the same answer. All right, now you guys continue on your own, and you need to calculate how much each ingredient will be when you divide it into 2 equal pieces. We've already done the peanut butter and the vegetable shortening. Make sure that you're keeping an organized list of your recipe so that it's easy for me to grade your work. Okay, here's an interesting question for us to look at. How many servings of cookies does the recipe make? And how many servings are in 1 dozen cookies? How many servings are in 4 dozen cookies? Show your work. So really there's 3 different recipes here for us to work on. One recipe makes 2 dozen cookies, One recipe makes 1 dozen cookies and another recipe makes 4 dozen cookies. So really there's 3 parts to this question. Okay, looking at the original recipe, if I make 2 dozen cookies, I'm going to end up with, let's see, before I say that, okay, this recipe makes 2 dozen cookies, and my serving size for each person to have is 1.5 cookies. Here I have 2 different units of measurement. I have dozen of cookies and I have individual cookies. So I need to convert my 2 dozen to individual cookies. There's 12 cookies in a dozen, so that means 2 dozen will be 24 cookies. Now I can take my 24 cookies and divide it into 1.5 cookie servings. You're probably wondering how to solve this since now we have a mixed number. We're going to need to convert this mixed number to an improper fraction. So I'm going to take my 24 cookies and divide it by 3 halves, because 3 halves is equivalent to 1.5. Now I can multiply by the reciprocal in order to solve. I'm going to take 24. My division sign is going to become a multiplication symbol. And then the reciprocal of 3 halves is 2/3. Give whole number 24 a denominator of 1 because that will make it easier to multiply. Straight across your numerators and straight across your denominators. Okay, last step. We're going to have to divide in order to put this back in mixed number form. Go ahead and pause this video while you calculate that. Okay, now you can double check your division with what I'm going to show you. So 4 divided by 3 is 1. 1 times 3 is 3. 4 minus 3 is 1. Bring down the 8. 3 goes into 18 6 times. 6 times 3 is 18, so I have no remainder, which is great. Okay, so my final answer is a recipe that makes 2 dozen cookies will give you 16 servings. Okay, now you guys need to figure out if you make 1 dozen cookies, how many servings will you have? And if you make 4 dozen cookies, how many servings will you have? Good luck, have fun, and let me know if you need me.